What you are about to hear is a story that rocked a nation and exposed a raw nerve in our society. It started with a quiet, elderly black man boarding a plane, hoping for a peaceful journey to see his granddaughter. It ended with an entire airport terminal falling into a stunned, deafening silence. An entitled corporate executive demanded he be removed, accusing him of being a threat. But when authorities forced him to open his bag, they didn't find a weapon. They found a secret. A small, simple medal that would not only save his seat, but would unravel the life of the woman who tried to humiliate him, proving that karma sometimes is delivered at 30,000 feet. The air in Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport hummed with a familiar chaotic energy. It was a symphony of rolling suitcases, muffled announcements, and the low murmur of 1,000 intersecting lives. Amidst this river of humanity stood Sergeant Major Marcus Thorne. At 78, he moved with a deliberate, measured grace that seemed to carve out a small pocket of stillness around him. His back was straight, a testament to a lifetime of discipline, but a slight limp in his right leg hinted at stories he rarely told. His clothes were simple pressed grey slacks, a crisp white button-down shirt, and a dark, unassuming windbreaker. In his hand, he clutched a single, well-worn leather duffel bag. It wasn't large, but he held it with a peculiar reverence, as if it contained not just his belongings, but the very essence of his journey. He was flying to Portland, Oregon, to celebrate the 10th birthday of his granddaughter Maya. The thought of her bright smile was the only thing that made the ordeal of modern air travel bearable. Marcus was a man of few words, a listener in a world full of talkers. His silence was not empty. It was heavy, filled with memories of sun-scorched landscapes in places most people couldn't find on a map. The echoes of commands shouted over the roar of helicopter blades, and the faces of young men he had led, mentored, and mourned. He had served 30 years in the United States Army, rising to the rank of Sergeant Major in the 75th Ranger Regiment. He was a man forged in pressure, quiet in peace. As he waited in the boarding line for Global Airways Flight 1142, he felt a familiar unease. Crowds made him antsy. He preferred the open sky, the quiet of his small garden back in Georgia. He watched the other passengers, a cross-section of America. There were families with excited children, business travelers with Bluetooth headsets, and college students glued to their phones. He was to them just another old man, invisible in his simplicity. It was a role he had grown accustomed to, and in some ways preferred. Now boarding Zone 4, the gate agent's voice crackled. That was his zone. Marcus shuffled forward, his ticket clutched in a hand, marked by age and hardship. He presented his ticket, received a perfunctory nod, and made his way down the jet bridge. The metallic corridor felt like a tunnel into another world, one of recycled air and forced proximity. His seat was 14C, an aisle seat. He was grateful for the small mercy of not being squeezed into a middle seat. As he reached his row, he saw that the window and middle seats were already occupied. He nodded politely to the young couple and began the process of stowing his single leather duffel in the overhead bin. He placed it carefully lengthwise, ensuring it took up as little space as possible. As he was about to close the bin, a sharp, imperious voice cut through the cabin's low hum from behind him. "Excuse me, you can't put that there." Marcus turned. Standing in the aisle was a woman in her late 40s, dressed in a tailored navy blue business suit that probably cost more than his entire monthly pension. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her face was set in a mask of practiced impatience. She held a sleek, expensive-looking roller bag. "That's my space," she continued, gesturing towards the bin with a flick of her wrist. "My bag needs to go there. Your thing needs to go somewhere else." Marcus looked at the bin. There was ample space next to his duffel bag. "Ma'am," he said, his voice calm and steady, "there's plenty of room for both." The woman, whose name was Caroline Hayes, scoffed. She was a senior partner at Sterling and Finch, a prestigious management consulting firm in Chicago, and she was used to getting her way. She saw an old, slow man taking up what she considered her rightful territory. "No, you don't understand," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "My bag is a regulation carry-on. It fits perfectly in that spot. Your soft bag is taking up the optimal position. Move it." Marcus felt a familiar tightening in his chest. It was the same feeling he'd gotten decades ago, dealing with a fresh-faced lieutenant who had more ego than sense. He kept his voice even. "It will be fine, Mum. They'll both fit." He made a move to demonstrate, but she stepped forward, blocking him, and physically placing her hand on his duffel bag. "Don't touch my luggage space. I need this flight. I have $1 million client meeting in Portland. I will not have my belongings crushed by your clutter." The confrontation had started to draw glances. The young couple in the seats beside Marcus looked uncomfortable. A flight attendant, a young man named Liam, with kind eyes, began making his way down the aisle. "Is there a problem here?" Liam asked, his voice a practiced diplomatic calm. Caroline immediately turned on him, her voice escalating from irritation to outright indignation. "Yes, there is a problem. This man is refusing to move his bag from my designated spot. He's being incredibly difficult." Liam looked at the bin, then at Marcus's small duffel, then at Caroline's large roller bag. "Ma'am, there appears to be plenty of room for both bags. That's not the point," she snapped. "The point is, he needs to follow instructions. People like him need to understand the rules." The phrase hung in the air, thick and poisoned. People like him. Marcus's expression didn't change, but his eyes, which had seen so much, hardened slightly. He had heard that phrase before, in different contexts, in different decades, but it always meant the same thing. He was being judged not for his actions, but for who he was, an old black man who was in her way. He felt the eyes of the other passengers on him. He felt the weight of their judgment, their curiosity, their pity. All he wanted was to see his granddaughter. But in that moment, he knew this was no longer about an overhead bin. Liam, the flight attendant, was trapped. He was trained for this, of course. De-escalation was a core part of his job. But Caroline Hayes was a masterclass in entitlement, a type he encountered far too often. "Ma'am, let's just try to fit both bags," Liam suggested, maintaining his professional smile. "I'm sure we can make it work." "No," Caroline said, her voice rising in pitch. "I want his bag moved. Now. Put it at the back of the plane. Or check it, I don't care. But it's not staying here." Marcus Thorne stood his ground, his silence a stark contrast to her shrill demands. He simply looked at her, his gaze unwavering. This seemed to infuriate her even more. To her, his calm was not dignity. It was defiance. "What are you looking at?" she sneered at him. "Are you threatening me?" The accusation was so absurd, it was almost comical, but her delivery was chillingly serious. A few passengers gasped. The man in the seat across the aisle, a burly construction worker, muttered, "Oh, for God's sake, lady." Marcus finally spoke, his voice low and raspy, yet carrying an authority that cut through her tirade. "Ma'am, I have not threatened anyone. I simply want to take my seat." He was aggressive, Caroline insisted, turning back to Liam. "When I asked him to move his bag, he became hostile. I don't feel safe with him sitting this close to me. My seat is 15D right behind him. I want him moved. Better yet, I want him removed from this flight." This was the nuclear option. The words aggressive, hostile, and I don't feel safe are tripwires in the airline industry. Liam's face paled slightly. He now had to follow a protocol he desperately wanted to avoid. "Ma'am, I don't think that's necessary," he began. "Are you questioning my assessment of the situation?" Caroline interrupted, puffing out her chest. She pulled a platinum business card from her purse. "I am Caroline Hayes, senior partner at Sterling & Finch. I am a 1,000,000-mile flyer with your airline. I know the rules, and I know you have a duty of care to your passengers. I am telling you as a premier customer that this man is a security risk." The lie was audacious, a weaponized complaint designed for maximum effect. She had framed it in the language of corporate power and passenger safety, a combination airline staff were trained to take with the utmost seriousness. Marcus felt a slow burn of anger, an emotion he hadn't truly felt in years. He had faced down armed men in the dead of night. He had held dying soldiers in his arms. He had endured prejudice that would have broken lesser men. To be called a threat by this woman in this sterile tube over a piece of luggage, it was a profound and deeply personal insult. "That is a lie," Marcus stated, his voice devoid of emotion. It was a simple statement of fact. His denial only fueled her performance. "See, he's arguing with me. He's unstable. I want the captain. I want airport security. I want him off this plane. Now." She screeched, ensuring everyone in the front half of the cabin could hear. The boarding process had ground to a halt. Passengers in the aisle were craned their necks, their phones subtly angled to record the unfolding drama. Jessica, a 19-year-old college student in seat 16F, had been recording since Caroline first raised her voice. She had a gut feeling this was more than just an argument. Liam, looking defeated, spoke into his wrist communicator. "Gate agent, this is Liam in the forward cabin. We have a passenger dispute that's escalating. I need the lead flight attendant and the captain to the jet bridge, please." A wave of groans rippled through the cabin. A delay was now inevitable. Caroline Hayes crossed her arms, a smug look of victory on her face. She had created a problem and was now demanding that the world bend to her will to solve it. She glanced at Marcus with undisguised contempt, as if he were a piece of garbage she was having successfully removed. Marcus Thorne did not move. He simply stood by his seat, his hand resting on the headrest, his old leather duffel bag sitting innocently in the overhead bin. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, thinking of Maya. He had promised her he'd be there to see her blow out her candles. He wouldn't let this woman break that promise. He would stand his ground not with anger, but with the unshakable certainty of a man who knew exactly who he was, even if the world around him refused to see it. The lead flight attendant, a stern-looking woman named Maria, arrived, followed shortly by the pilot, Captain Eva Rostova. Captain Rostova was a formidable presence, a woman in her 50s with sharp, intelligent eyes and an air of absolute command. She sized up the situation instantly. The irate, well-dressed woman, the stoic old man, and the frustrated flight attendant caught in the middle. "What's the problem here?" Captain Rostova asked, her voice calm but firm. It was a voice that tolerated no nonsense. Caroline launched into her story, embellishing it with every telling. "Captain, thank you for coming. This man was aggressive and hostile towards me over a simple luggage request. He refused a crew member's instruction, and he made me feel deeply unsafe. For the security of this flight, he must be removed." Captain Rostova listened patiently, her eyes flicking from Caroline to Marcus, then to Liam for confirmation. Liam looked pained. "Mum, with all due respect, that's not quite what happened. It was a disagreement over the bin and—" "Are you calling your premier customer a liar?" Caroline shot back. Captain Rostova held up a hand, silencing them both. Her gaze settled on Marcus Thorne. She looked at his posture, the stillness of his hands, the deep lines on his face. She saw not aggression, but a profound and weary patience. "Sir," she said, her tone respectful, "what is your side of the story?" Before Marcus could answer, Caroline interjected again. "His side doesn't matter. He's the problem. Look at his bag. He's probably got something illegal in there. He's being overly protective of it. You should have security search it." It was a vile, baseless accusation, a clear dog whistle. Captain Rostover's eyes narrowed. She had made her decision. But protocol was protocol. To de-escalate and demonstrate that every threat was taken seriously, even the fabricated ones, she had to play this out. "Sir," she said to Marcus, her voice softening slightly, "I'm sorry to ask this, but to resolve this situation and get this flight underway, would you be willing to show us what's in your duffel bag?" A hush fell over the cabin. Every eye was on Marcus Thorne. He had been accused, judged, and now he was being asked to prove his innocence in a court of public opinion convened at 30,000 feet. He looked at the captain, then at the smug face of Caroline Hayes, and after a long silent moment, he gave a single, slow nod. The air in the cabin was thick with anticipation. The conflict, which had started as a petty squabble, had metastasized into a full-blown security drama. Captain Rostover, maintaining her command, gestured for Liam to retrieve the bag. "Gently, please, Marcus," said his first words in several minutes. The request was quiet, but it carried an undeniable weight. Liam reached into the overhead bin and carefully lifted the old leather duffel. It was heavier than it looked. He handed it to Marcus, who took it with both hands. For a moment, he just held it in his lap, his weathered fingers tracing the worn seams. It felt as if he were preparing for a sacred ritual, not a security search on a crowded airplane. Caroline Hayes watched with a triumphant smirk, convinced her gambit had paid off. She expected to be vindicated, to see the old man exposed and humiliated before being hauled away. Captain Rostover knelt slightly in the aisle to be at eye level with Marcus. "Sir, you don't have to do this if you don't want to. We can deplane and have TSA take a look." Marcus shook his head. "No, it's better this way. It's better that people see." His words were cryptic, adding to the suspense. With slow, deliberate movements, he unzipped the main compartment of the duffel bag. The passengers in the surrounding rows leaned in their phones, still recording every second. Inside there were no weapons, no contraband, nothing threatening. There were just a few neatly folded clothes, a worn paperback novel, and a brightly wrapped birthday present, clearly for a child. A small stuffed unicorn peeked out from the wrapping paper. A wave of second-hand embarrassment for Carolyn washed over the nearby passengers. Her accusations were proving to be not only false, but cruel. She, however, was undeterred. So what it could be in a hidden compartment. "Check the whole thing," she demanded. Marcus ignored her. He reached deep into the bag past the gift for his granddaughter, his hand searching for something specific. He retrieved a small, hard case, about the size of a glasses case, made of dark, polished wood. It was old, the corners softened with age. He held it for a moment, his thumb rubbing the lid. He seemed to be in another place, entirely, his mind drifting back through the decades. He took a deep, shuddering breath, as if opening this box required a piece of his soul. Then he slowly lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded blue velvet, lay a medal. It wasn't just any medal. It was a 5-pointed star tipped with trefoils, suspended from a light blue silk ribbon emblazoned with 13 white stars. In the center of the star, the head of Minerva, the Roman goddess of wisdom and war, was encircled by the words, "United States of America." For a second, most passengers didn't understand what they were seeing. It was just a piece of metal on a ribbon. But in seat 12B, an elderly man named Mr. Henderson, a Vietnam veteran himself, who had been watching the scene with quiet fury, gasped. His voice, cracking with emotion, filled the stunned silence. "My God," he whispered, his voice loud enough for several rows to hear. That's the Medal of Honor." The words spread through the cabin like a physical wave. Medal of Honor. The Medal of Honor. The highest and most prestigious military decoration awarded to members of the United States Armed Forces. A medal given for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of life above and beyond the call of duty. A medal so rare that more people have flown to space than have received it. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a profound, deafening quiet that swallowed the hum of the ventilation, the beeping of phones, the rustle of clothing. Every passenger who could see, from the young student filming to the hardened businessman in first class, was frozen. Captain Eva Rostova, whose grandfather had fought in World War II, recognized it instantly. She straightened up from her crouch as if called to attention by a silent bugle. Her professional demeanor dissolved, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated awe and reverence. Her eyes, which had been firm and analytical, now glistened with unshed tears. Liam, the flight attendant, stood motionless, his mouth slightly agape. Maria, the lead attendant, brought a hand to her chest. Marcus Thorne didn't look at any of them. He stared down at the medal, at the object that represented both the proudest and most horrific day of his life. The day he had saved his entire platoon in a brutal ambush in the Ayadrang Valley, single-handedly charging an enemy machine gun nest, while wounded an act of valor that had cost him his best friend and a piece of his own humanity. He carried it not as a trophy, but as a memorial. He was taking it to show Maya, to explain a part of her grandfather's life she was now old enough to begin to understand. Into this sacred silence, Caroline Hayes's voice, now sounding weak and uncertain, piped up. "What is that? What does that even mean?" Captain Rostova turned her head slowly, her eyes fixing on Caroline, with a look of such glacial contempt that the woman physically flinched. The captain's voice, when she finally spoke, was quiet, but it carried the force of a thunderclap in the silent cabin. "Ma'am," she said, her voice trembling with barely suppressed rage. "That thing means you are in the presence of a national hero. It means this man has displayed a level of courage you couldn't possibly comprehend. And it means that you have just committed an act of such profound disrespect it takes my breath away." The silence was broken, the spell was shattered, and the gears of justice, swift and merciless, began to turn. The passengers who had been silent, witnesses, erupted. It wasn't a loud, angry mob, but a low, intense rumble of collective disgust, directed squarely at Caroline Hayes. The man who had muttered earlier now spoke clearly. "Get her off the plane," he said, his voice hard as iron. Another passenger chimed in. "She's the one who's a threat, a disgrace." Jessica, the college student, kept her phone recording, panning from the medal in Sergeant Major Thorne's hands to the horrified face of Captain Rostova, and finally settling on the crumbling facade of Caroline Hayes. This was the climax of the story, the moment of absolute reversal. Caroline's face had gone from smug to confused to utterly panicked. She looked around, seeking an ally, a friendly face, but found only a sea of cold, accusing eyes. Her corporate power, her frequent flyer status, her sense of inherent superiority, it had all evaporated. She was stripped bare, exposed, as a petty, prejudiced bully. I didn't know," she stammered, a pathetic attempt at defense. "You didn't need to know," Captain Rostova shot back, her voice cutting like a razor. "You needed to have an ounce of human decency. You saw a quiet, elderly black man, and you decided he was a problem. You racially profiled him, you lied about him, and you abused the safety protocols of this airline to harass him. You didn't see a person. You saw a target for your own arrogance." The captain stood to her full height. "Liam," she commanded. "Yes, Captain," he responded, his voice shaking slightly. "Inform the gate agent that we are removing a passenger, Ms. Caroline Hayes." "Wait, you can't do that." Caroline shrieked, her composure finally shattering completely. "I have a meeting. My company paid for this ticket. I will sue you. I will sue this airline." "Be my guest, Captain," Rostova said, her voice dangerously calm. "We have a cabin full of witnesses. We have video recordings from multiple passengers, I'm sure. And we have a Medal of Honor recipient as your victim. So please go ahead and sue. I'd like to see how that plays out for you and your firm, Sterling and Finch." At the mention of her company's name, a new wave of terror washed over Caroline's face. She wasn't just an individual anymore. She was a representative of a major brand. The potential for professional and public relations fallout was catastrophic. 2 airport security officers, summoned by the gate agent, appeared at the door of the plane. They were large, stoic men who had seen it all, but they paused when they saw the scene, the captain standing like a sentinel, a woman in a business suit looking hysterical, and an old man quietly holding the nation's highest honor. Captain Rostova simply pointed at Caroline. "This woman is being removed from my aircraft for abusive and disruptive behavior." Caroline tried to argue to plead, but the officers were impassive. "Ma'am, you need to collect your belongings and come with us. Now." As she struggled to retrieve her roller bag from a bin further down, a slow, deliberate sound began to fill the cabin. It started in the back. A single passenger began to clap. Then another. And another. Within seconds, the entire plane from the front row of first class to the last row in coach was filled with a thunderous rolling applause. It wasn't for Caroline's removal. It was for Marcus Thorne. It was an ovation of apology, of respect, of gratitude. It was a plane full of strangers, united in a spontaneous act of honor for a man they had misjudged just minutes before. Marcus looked up, startled. Tears welled in his eyes for the first time. He hadn't cried in the jungle. He hadn't cried at his retirement ceremony. But the unexpected kindness of these strangers broke through his hardened exterior. He slowly, reverently closed the wooden box and placed it back in his duffel bag. As Caroline Hayes was escorted off the plane, her face a mask of humiliation and rage, she had to walk the aisle past Marcus. He didn't look at her. He just stared straight ahead, his quiet dignity, his ultimate victory. Once she was gone, Captain Rostova returned to Marcus's seat. She knelt in the aisle once more. "Sergeant Major Thorne," she said, her voice now thick with emotion. She must have seen his name on the passenger manifest. "On behalf of Global Airways, and as the daughter of a veteran, I am profoundly sorry for what you just experienced on my aircraft. It is an honor to have you on board." Marcus simply nodded, unable to speak. The captain stood and addressed the entire cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we will be underway shortly. Thank you for your patience." She then turned to the first-class cabin. "And if the gentleman in seat 2A wouldn't mind, I'd like to offer his seat to Sergeant Major Thorne." The man in 2A, a CEO who had been watching the entire event, was already on his feet. "I would be honored to give him my seat." Marcus initially protested. "No, that's not necessary." But the entire cabin seemed to insist. "Take the seat," someone shouted. "You've earned it." Defeated by their kindness, Marcus allowed Liam to help him with his bag and escort him to the plush, spacious seat in first class. As he sat down, the flight attendants offered him a drink, a warm towel, anything he wanted. But he just asked for a glass of water and the quiet to collect himself. The journey to see his granddaughter was back on track, but it had become something much more. It had become a testament to the fact that sometimes, in a world full of noise and prejudice, true honor, when revealed, has the power to silence it all. As Flight 1142 finally taxied down the runway, a different kind of storm was brewing on the ground. Jessica, the college student in seat 16F, had stopped recording her hands, trembling slightly. She had over 10 minutes of crystal-clear footage: Carolyn Hayes' initial condescension, her escalating lies, the arrival of the captain, the breathtaking reveal of the medal, and Caroline's humiliating exit to a cabin full of applause. She knew she had captured something important. This wasn't just airport drama. It was a powerful story about respect race and hidden heroism. As soon as the plane was in the air and the Wi-Fi service became available, she made a decision. She trimmed the video down to the most crucial 4 minutes, wrote a simple factual caption: "Woman tries to get black veteran kicked off. Flight finds out he's a Medal of Honor recipient," added the hashtags "Your Global Airways" and "Respect Your Vets," and posted it to Twitter and TikTok. Then she put her phone on airplane mode and tried to read a book, having no idea she had just lit a digital wildfire. By the time the flight landed in Portland, the video had exploded. It had been viewed over 1 million times on TikTok and retweeted tens of thousands of times on Twitter. News outlets, content creators, and military veteran groups had already ripped and reposted it. The terms Carolyn Hayes, Sterling and Finch, and Honor the Major were trending nationally. When Marcus deplaned, he was met by a Global Airways ground crew supervisor who personally escorted him towards baggage claim. Sergeant Major Thorne, the woman said, "Your flight back is on us, and we've upgraded you to first class for your return journey. We are so deeply sorry." Marcus, bewildered by the attention, simply thanked her and continued on his way, eager to finally see his son and granddaughter. He was blissfully unaware of the firestorm raging in the virtual world. Caroline Hayes was not so lucky. By the time her rebooked flight on another airline landed in Portland, hours later, her life was already imploding. Her phone, when she turned it on, was a useless cascade of notifications. Hundreds of emails, thousands of social media tags, and dozens of missed calls from her office, her boss, and even her family. The video was everywhere. Commentators were dissecting her every word, her every sneer. Veterans organizations were issuing furious statements. Corporate watchdogs were digging into her professional history. Her carefully curated image of a powerful, successful executive had been shattered and replaced by a new, indelible identity, the plain Karen who berated a national hero. The headquarters of Sterling and Finch in Chicago was in full-blown crisis mode. The firm's phone lines were jammed with furious callers. Their social media pages were flooded with 1-star reviews and comments demanding Caroline be fired. Sterling and Finch prided itself on its image of integrity and excellence. This incident was a PR nuke. Jonathan Sterling, the firm's founding partner and a man who valued his company's reputation above all else, saw the video before his plane had even landed. He was a ruthless businessman, and he recognized an unmitigated disaster when he saw one. He called an emergency meeting with his board and PR team. The verdict was swift and unanimous. While Caroline was in the air, her fate had been decided. She was a liability that had to be cut loose immediately and publicly. Back in Portland, Marcus was finally wrapped in the warm embrace of his son Mark and his granddaughter Maya. When Maya hugged him, her small arms around his neck, the tension of the day finally melted away. He handed her the brightly wrapped gift. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Grandpa, you made it." She squealed with delight, unwrapping the gift to reveal the stuffed unicorn. As they drove from the airport, Mark's phone buzzed incessantly. He glanced at it, his brow furrowing. "Dad, something's going on," A video from your flight is all over the internet." He showed the phone to Marcus. There it was, the whole ugly incident broadcast for the world to see. Marcus watched with a heavy heart. He had not sought this attention. He felt exposed, his quiet life suddenly thrust into a harsh public spotlight. "I didn't want this," he said softly. "I know," Dad Mark replied, placing a hand on his shoulder. "But maybe it's something people needed to see." Meanwhile, a tenacious investigative journalist in New York named Olivia Vargas, who worked for a major online news publication, was already on the case. She wasn't content with just the viral video. She wanted the full story. Who was Caroline Hayes? And more importantly, who was the quiet, dignified hero at the center of it all? She started by confirming Marcus Thorne's military record. When the Department of Defense confirmed his Medal of Honor citation, she knew this story was even bigger than it appeared. It was a story of a forgotten hero clashing with the entitlement of the modern age. Olivia booked the first flight to Portland. She had to find Sergeant Major Thorne. The morning after the incident, the consequences for Caroline Hayes came down like an avalanche. She woke up in her Portland hotel room to an email from Jonathan Sterling. The subject line was cold and final: termination of employment. The body of the email was brutal in its corporate efficiency. It cited the company's code of conduct, the irreparable damage done to the Sterling and Finch brand, and a zero-tolerance policy for discriminatory or abusive behavior. Her access to company servers had been revoked. Her corporate cards were cancelled. A security team was already boxing up her office in Chicago. In the space of less than 24 hours, her career, which she had meticulously built over 2 decades, had been utterly annihilated. Attached to the email was a link to a press release that was already live on their website. For immediate release. Sterling and Finch Terminates senior partner. Caroline Hayes, Sterling and Finch, is appalled by the recent behavior of Ms. Caroline Hayes on a Global Airways flight, which was captured on video and has been widely circulated. Her actions are in direct violation of our company's core values of respect, integrity, and decency. We have the deepest respect for the men and women of our armed forces, and we are especially humbled by the quiet heroism of Medal of Honor recipients like Sergeant Major Marcus Thorne. Ms. Hayes's employment has been terminated effective immediately. We offer our sincerest apologies to Sergeant Major Thorne and to the public for the distress this incident has caused. The statement was a masterclass in damage control. It named Marcus, praised him, and threw Carolyn under the bus with ruthless precision. The story was now on every major news network: CNN, Fox News, MSNBC. They all led their morning broadcasts, with the story playing the viral video and analyzing the public fallout. Caroline was a pariah. Her LinkedIn profile was inundated with hateful messages. Old colleagues and clients ghosted her. Even her country club in Chicago initiated a review of her membership. The world she had built, a world propped up by wealth status and intimidation, had crumbled because she couldn't stand to share an overhead bin with a man she deemed beneath her. The karma was swift, but it wasn't just professional. Her actions had a deeply personal toll. Her ex-husband, with whom she shared a tense custody agreement over their teenage son, immediately filed an emergency motion with the court, arguing that her public behavior and the resulting vitriol demonstrated an unstable environment for their child. She was not just losing her job, she was at risk of losing her family. Across the country in Portland, the Thorne family was dealing with a different kind of fallout. Their quiet life had been invaded. Media vans were parked on the street outside Mark's suburban home. Olivia Vargas, the journalist, was among them, but unlike the others, she didn't shout questions or try to shove a microphone in anyone's face. She approached respectfully, leaving a note with her card in their mailbox, explaining she wanted to tell Sergeant Major Thorne's story with the dignity it deserved. Inside, Marcus was struggling. He was a private man, and this level of fame was deeply unsettling. He watched the news reports with a sense of detachment, as if they were talking about someone else. "They're making me into some kind of celebrity," he told his son, shaking his head. "That's not what it was about. That medal, it's not for me. It's for the boys who didn't come home." Maya, his granddaughter, seemed to be the only one who could cut through his unease. She sat on the floor beside his chair, playing with her new unicorn. She didn't understand the media frenzy, but she understood her grandpa was sad. "Grandpa," she said, looking up at him with wide, innocent eyes, "that lady on the airplane was mean." "Are you okay?" Her simple question grounded him. He looked down at her and managed a small smile. "I'm okay, sweetheart. Grandpa is just fine." That afternoon, Mark convinced his father to speak with Olivia Vargas. They met in the family's quiet backyard. Olivia was professional empathetic, and most importantly, she was a good listener. She didn't ask him about the confrontation at first. She asked him about his service, about the 75th Ranger Regiment, about his life after the military. She asked him about his wife, who had passed away 5 years prior, and about his granddaughter Maya. Slowly Marcus began to open up. He explained that he rarely, if ever, took the medal out. He was only bringing it this time because Maya was old enough to learn about that part of his life, about service and sacrifice. "The medal doesn't define me," Marcus told Olivia, his voice steady. "My character does. My family does. What that woman did. It wasn't about me, not really. It was about what she saw when she looked at me. She didn't see a soldier or a grandfather or just a man trying to get home. She saw a problem. And I guess the world is telling her she was wrong." Olivia asked him what he wanted people to take away from this. Marcus thought for a long moment, watching a bird land on the fence. That respect isn't something you earn with a fancy title or an expensive suit. It's something you should give freely to everyone. You never know the weight another person is carrying. You never know the battles they've already fought. Olivia's story, published the next day, under the headline, "Honor in the Silence." The true story of Sergeant Major Marcus Thorne became the definitive account of the event. It wasn't just about the confrontation, it was a poignant profile of a humble hero who had been thrust into the spotlight against his will. It painted a powerful contrast, the quiet dignity of Marcus Thorne versus the hollow arrogance of Caroline Hayes. The story added fuel to the fire, but it also shifted the narrative. People were no longer just angry at Caroline. They were inspired by Marcus. Donations poured into veterans' charities in his name. The CEO of Global Airways flew to Portland to deliver a personal face-to-face apology, along with a promise to overhaul their crew training on de-escalation and implicit bias. He also offered Marcus and his entire family free flights for life. For Caroline Hayes, there was no redemption arc. She became a case study in corporate and social self-destruction. Forced to sell her expensive condo in Chicago and move to a smaller town to escape the notoriety, she was left with nothing but the consequences of her own prejudice. The hard karma was not just the loss of a job, but the complete and utter loss of the status she had valued more than human decency. She had tried to eject a man from a flight, and in the end, she had ejected herself from the life she knew. Weeks bled into months, and the digital wildfire of Flight 1142 eventually dwindled to embers. The news cycle, with its insatiable appetite for fresh outrage, moved on. The world, for the most part, forgot the face of Caroline Hayes and the quiet dignity of the man she had wronged. But for those at the heart of the storm, the echoes of that day in the airport terminal were not so fleeting. They had become a permanent part of the landscapes of their lives. For Marcus Thorne, life in his small Georgia town returned to its familiar, gentle rhythm, yet everything had changed. He could no longer be the invisible old man he once was. His face was now known, his story a piece of local legend. A trip to the hardware store would be interrupted by a stranger wanting to shake his hand. At his favorite diner, someone would often quietly pay for his breakfast. These encounters were awkward at first for a man who had spent a lifetime deflecting attention, but he slowly began to understand their significance. He wasn't a celebrity. He was a catalyst for connection. People didn't just see a hero. They saw their own fathers, grandfathers, and uncles who had served and come home, their stories carried in silence. He accepted an invitation to speak at the local VFW post, not as a Medal of Honor recipient, but simply as a fellow soldier. The room was packed, filled with men whose faces were maps of their own wars. Marcus didn't stand at the podium. He sat on a stool holding a cup of coffee and spoke for only 5 minutes. "We are a quiet generation," he began, his voice raspy but clear. "We were taught to carry our burdens without complaint. We came home and built lives, raised families, and folded the flag of our service neatly in a drawer. We didn't ask for parades, we just asked for a peaceful place to land. But sometimes," he paused, looking at the faces before him, "the world needs to be reminded that the quietest person in the room might have the most to say. Not with words, but with the life they've lived. Your life has value. Your service has meaning. Don't ever let anyone make you feel small enough to fit into their narrow assumptions." When he finished, there was no applause. There was something more profound, a deep, resonant silence of shared understanding, followed by a room full of men getting to their feet in a unified gesture of respect. His relationship with his granddaughter Maya became his true north. One afternoon, as they sat on his porch swing, she held the wooden box with the medal, now an object of fascination for her. "Grandpa," she asked, her voice small, "did you get that for being the best fighter?" Marcus stopped the swing and looked at her. "No, sweetheart," he said gently. "I got this for being the best protector. Fighting is about hurting. Protecting is about loving the people next to you so much that you would do anything to make sure they get home safely. It's a sad prize because it means the day was very, very bad. But it's a hopeful one because it means that even on the worst days, people can still choose to be brave for each other." She nodded, a glimmer of understanding in her young eyes. The unicorn he'd given her was named Major, and it stood sentinel on her pillow every night. For Caroline Hayes, the echoes were the relentless sound of her own failure. She had fled to a small grey town in Idaho, a place where she hoped her name meant nothing. But the internet is a cruel and permanent archive. She had tried to get a corporate job, but the moment a background check was run, the offers would evaporate. The polite, sterile rejections felt more damning than any accusation. Her new life was a prison of mediocrity. She spent her days in a dimly lit apartment doing low-wage data entry work on a sputtering laptop. The sharp business suits were replaced by faded sweatpants. The expense account lunches were now stale coffee and a bagel at her cluttered kitchen table. The hard karma was not a single dramatic event. It was this slow, grinding erosion of her identity. One evening, scrolling through her phone, she found old photos of herself on a yacht in Monaco, laughing with clients, a glass of champagne in her hand. The woman in the photo was a stranger to her now, a ghost from a life she had torched with her own arrogance. She felt a surge of familiar rage, but it had nowhere to go. She couldn't blame Marcus Thorne, the airline, or the internet. In the deep, suffocating silence of her self-imposed exile, she was left with only one person to blame: the woman in the mirror. The ripple effect of the incident continued to spread. Inspired by her mentor, Olivia Vargas, Jessica changed her major to journalism and earned a prestigious internship at a national newspaper. Captain Eva Rostova worked with Global Airways to create the Thorne Protocol, a new training module focused on dignifying and de-escalating conflicts involving elderly passengers and veterans. Liam, the flight attendant, became a lead instructor for that very program. One crisp autumn afternoon, a letter arrived at Marcus's home. It was handwritten on simple stationery, the return address from a town in Ohio. It was from Mr. Henderson, the Vietnam veteran who had first identified the medal on the plane. Marcus sat in his favorite armchair to read it. Sergeant Major, the letter began. I hope this letter finds you well. My name is Frank Henderson. I was the man in seat 12B on that flight to Portland. I have not been able to stop thinking about that day. I served 2 tours in Vietnam. When I came home, it wasn't a hero's welcome. We were told to grow our hair out, not to wear our uniforms off base. We were treated like a problem, an embarrassment. For 50 years, I've carried that feeling with me, that my service was something to be hidden. When that woman started in on you, I felt that old anger, that old shame. But when you opened that box, and I saw that blue ribbon, it was like a light went on in that airplane. And when all those people, young and old, black and white, started to applaud for you, they were applauding for all of us. You didn't flinch, you didn't yell. You just stood in your own truth. You gave me back a piece of my pride that day, Sergeant Major. A piece I didn't even know I had lost. For that, I am eternally grateful. Tears welled in Marcus's eyes. He read the letter twice, then 3 times. He carefully folded it and walked over to the mantel where he kept the wooden box. He opened the lid, the Medal of Honor, glinting in the afternoon sun. He didn't place the letter next to the medal. He gently placed it underneath, so the velvet-lined bed where the medal rested now lay upon the foundation of Mr. Henderson's words. The medal represented a single terrible day of valor from his past. But the letter was about the present. It was proof that the battle for dignity was a quiet one, fought not in jungles but in the everyday spaces of the world. And sometimes it could be won. The silence in the airport had been a moment of shock, but the echoes that followed were a symphony of honor. A sound that for Sergeant Major Marcus Thorne was finally louder than the ghosts of his past. The story of Sergeant Major Marcus Thorne is a powerful reminder that heroes walk among us every single day. They are not always in uniform. Sometimes they are quiet grandfathers in airports, carrying the unseen weight of a lifetime of service. This incident, born from prejudice and arrogance, ultimately became a testament to the power of dignity and the swift, unyielding hand of karma. It showed that one person's intolerance can be overcome by the collective decency of many. It's a story about what happens when a person's true character is revealed, both the ugly and the honorable. If this story moved you, please take a moment to hit that like button to show your support. Share this video with your friends and family to spread this important message of respect for our veterans and elders. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell for more real-life stories that matter. What did you think of the captain's actions? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you for listening.